Very special episode of NBL now coming your way because I've managed to track down Adam Forde, the head coach of the Cairns Taipans, here in Melbourne for the pre-season as we record this. But we've got a lot to chat through, Forde, so thanks for coming on, man, and how you doing?
Yeah, this is a new edition. This is the NBL Lounge, so I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but good to finally catch up with you.
It was probably 4 or 5 months ago where I started to get a little sad that I wasn't going to have these opportunities because it looked like you weren't going to be around for the Cairns Taipans this year, foreseeable future. That's obviously changed. Talk us through, maybe go back to that starting point of at the end of last year, where your head was at.
It's funny. I don't even know where to start because, I mean, the off-season itself, so much happened. You know, not just with the conclusion of the NBL season last year and then, you know, the 3-on-3 stuff that I did as well, and then I got married in the off season too. I have a very patient wife. We've been together for 10 years, and so that was long overdue. And then in between, still being involved with Cairns and you know, exploring some other things, and you know, you sort of get to a point where what was amazing was seeing the work behind the scenes and being involved in that. And I know a lot didn't get out in terms of how hard Mark and Troy were working behind the scenes, but you know, seeing the work they were putting into it and the vision that they had, and keeping those open lines of communication. That, you know, when we started talking about the potential to, you know, what does this look like moving forward if I was part of this as well, and them going all in with that all in mindset, you know, putting their head on the chopping block, any type of analogy you want to use. Yeah, there was like a real, like I wanted to be part of that. I knew I'd rather be in it than on the outside looking in. So again, I got a very patient wife that the house was packed up and we sort of talked about the idea of staying. So yeah, you know, it's hard to sort of pinpoint exactly when and where and how it all happened because it was such a busy off season, but now it's really exciting being part of this new chapter and this new season and this new look team. There's still essentially the ethos of who we are, which is, you know, we're still a community club. You know, we still represent the people of Cairns. We still got, you know, some exceptional rookies, you know, that have had an amazing collegiate career that come here because of the track record we have in providing young players a platform to really fast track and showcase their playing ability. But now, like I said, we've got a different shift in culture in a sense that we're not part of this survivalist mindset or this, you know, underdog tag. You know, the mindset now is we have the resources and the facilities and the personnel to win a championship. And that is the mindset now, that everybody's putting their reputation and career on the line, that this is going to work, and you know, it's an exciting thing to be part of.
It really is, and again, it's for all that work behind the scenes, not just the roster build, which we'll talk on. And I want to quickly maybe go back even further to just the Cairns' recent history, where you talk about, I think Troy said it the best when I caught up with him in Vegas, how there's only so much that the Cairns Taipans could do each year, to the point of when they were reaching a semi-final series or getting close, having the success, everything had to go right. You had to have luck on your side health-wise. You had to make sure you nailed your imports, you nailed all of this. If one slip-up, guys missed extended periods, you couldn't replace guys. And that's a hard task to do. Now, I think you found it hard in your own right, but you found a way to still be competitive. But he also admits now you look at the rest of the league, the talent's just gone through the roof where, you know what, we need to take some of those extra parts out of it and then let's join the party.
Yeah, I mean, we're under no illusion as we sit here and say how much, you know, we've got this exceptional amount of talent in our roster, but so does 9 other teams in the league. And so we know that Jack McVeigh isn't alone going to get it done for us, and it's all the pieces that are coming in collectively and building that team to be able to play a particular brand of basketball. But yeah, you know, the challenges you don't really appreciate it till it happens to you, in a sense of like the retention of players. You know, it was one thing to discover guys and get guys through a system, and it's cool when you see them go off to the NBA or a higher end deal in Europe, but it gets harder each year when you keep playing against the guys that, you know, you sort of worked with the last couple of years. And so, you know, there's one change, right? That now Sam Wardenberg, for example, is someone that we would like to try and keep forever. Now, if he does move on, it could be for any other reason, but we would hope now that the financial reason isn't one of them, which is what it's been in the past. And so injuries is always an important part for any team. When they talk about luck in the season, it's historically been the case for the last, at least definitely the last 5 championship teams, that those teams that have won it have had close to, if not their full roster. And that's included not only the grand final series, but also the semi-final series. I think about the year that Perth did really well and then got swept in the grand final series because Bryce Cotton was out with that blood clot in his thigh. So, luck and unluckiness can happen at any stage during the season. But, for us now to have almost a contingency plan to say, okay, knock on wood, if we do have a situation where we have 3 of our starters out, we're not just rolling into a game with the oh well mentality and see who steps up, but we might have some things in place now to help sort of band-aid that solution until those guys come back.
I loved hearing you before talk about how you're keeping that same mindset and the same idea of what's made you who you are and what's made the Taipans who they are, and always competitive with the young talent, emerging talent. Sometimes guys who just want a second chance or a change of scenery. How do you envision keeping that, connecting that to now also bringing in some really high-level talent, which we'll talk about? You mentioned Jack McVeigh, but Admiral Schofield, all these pieces. These are some really, really big names, but still making sure that core is there from what are the Taipans.
Yeah, I guess part of it, what helps, right, is like, when we talk about timing, for example, timing worked out really well for us and Rain. And what helped sort of get that over the line was the connection between us, Taryn, and Rain and Taryn. And so, you use that resource because that's available to us to say, well, here's an example of someone that and connect with, and he can give you a bit of a real-world experience with that. And Mo in a similar stance as well, who had a successful collegiate career at Rutgers and BYU, but you want to still use that with the success that we had that's still recent, with the idea that you've got one eye on the future to say, okay, while we're talking about the high-level marquee players we have now, there's an exciting prospect to say, okay, if we got Rain on a 2-year deal, but now also what does that look like in year 3 or 4 potentially, and have that play growth mindset, retention of Australian players in your core Aussies is really important. So, you can revisit players that you sort of looked at. You can revisit other players that have been in the league for a while. But I think especially with, and this is not to diminish the value of other rookies in the league, but I sit here, if I go, well, if you had to do a depth chart of all the available rookies, I feel like I got the top 2 ones that I wanted for what they bring, not only on the court, but what they're about off the court, and their experience. We're not talking about a low major, mid-major, half decent, career. We're talking about Rain, for example. Obviously, he was with the Boomers, but he's 3rd in the nation for 3-point made. Louisville finished 2nd in the ACC. His transition from that to the NBL is going to be pretty smooth. And we kind of need that as well because, there's a potential that between him and Mo, they're going to be sharing that 2-guard spot, and there's going to be a lot of responsibility for that.
Is there a part of you when you talk about the high-level talent, when we talk about the patience it took with the Jack McVeigh signing and the approach there, knowing that, okay, if we can get Jack McVeigh, we've seen the success of Illawarra recently, Tasmania, where he's one of the best local or imports or whatever you want to, however you grade everybody in the league. How do we make his life easier to be the best that he is? What complementary pieces can we look at? Is that how you kind of look at building a roster? Sam Wardenberg, one of the best local talents in the league, was already back. What can we put around those two to really go ahead and shake this thing up? Is that how you look at building a team, or is it more of individual basis, I can make this work once they're all here?
Yeah, it's an interesting runner-up because even when you talk about, let's use Taryn, for example, right? So there was a cut-off last year for Taryn where he obviously went through the draft process, and I think let's loosely say it's July 15th, right? But, there's a holding pattern for us that we've got basically 90% of the roster done, and then you've sort of got an import spot lying in wait to go, okay, if we get Taryn, we can go and import 3, but if we don't get Taryn, that has to be an import 1. Who are we going to move as a local player into that 3 spot? And I mean, there was a similar situation with Jack. You know, there was a level of like, okay, we knew we wanted to get a high level marquee dude. You know, Jack arguably right now is at the top of his game. You know, he's coming off a successful 36 months really in his growth and his trajectory. And he's 29, so he's still got more to add to his game, and he's on the rise. But you know, if we don't get him, how does the rest of the roster fill out and look? And so there is a part where you sit here and go, okay, yes, there's Wardenberg. I need a piece that can complement him, but you sort of have to wait for that first domino to drop. And so you have depth charts of what does option A, B, C look like. Okay, if we don't get Jack, if we go import 4, who moves up to the 3? And then what's the requirement there for an import point guard? Well, he's probably going to have to be a scorer. You know, guys we looked at, for example, like a Boogie Ellis, a guy who's fantastic and dynamic off the point guard, could come out and score 20, 30 points a game for you. Defensively gets after it, but primarily an offensive weapon. But then if you do get Jack, which is what we did, now moves into a different depth chart. And so when you have a Wardenberg and you have a Jack and we want to bring Sko in and then you've got Rain Smith, well, it makes sense to get someone that's going to be Ashton, you know, who's this defensive-minded, pass-first hound of a point guard who's an NBA level defender. But you don't know that you want to get him, and you don't know that he's the perfect fit yet until all the other pieces fall. So, look, a lot of people will sit here and say, look like we're sitting on our hands, but the reality is this is credit to, you know, my coaching stuff, and especially Will Lopez. You know, he was doing a lot of this behind the scenes and planning out these, prospective player depth chart lists of what does it look like if we got option A, B, C, and D. So I know that's a long answer to what your question was, but you really take what's best talent and then you work with what best fits around them afterwards. It's a patient game.
It seems like a daunting game too, though. Is there part of it where it's stressful? You kind of enjoy that part? Is it a weird like enjoyment of like, you know what, this is just part of it all?
I guess it's a weird like, it's not fun, but then also it's like anything. Once you get it, there's like an exhilarating high that comes from it, and so you do sort of find yourself wanting to do that every year. So, for example, again, like last year, Taron, you know, was I want to roughly say it was like $110,000, $120,000 player, right? So, which was an amazing value for what he's worth and what he did, and that's tense. Now we've got more money to work with. It's the same mythology, right? It just now we say, okay, we want to do the same thing with Jack. He's trying to get into the NBA. He's trying to explore what other avenues there are. Regardless what the dollar amount is, you're still sort of chasing that same mindset because you can play it safe and conservative. And I felt like there was a part where I probably dropped the ball a little bit last year with that, getting some picks that were a little bit on the safer side. But safe doesn't win championships, right? And so, you know, this is the mindset we've always sort of had. Now it's just a bigger risk with the caliber of players we're able to attract because of what Troy and Mark were able to do. I know they stress about it. I'm sure that to an extent they enjoy it as well. But, you know, we got the result we wanted. It would have been a very different conversation we're having right now if we didn't get that and we're sitting here saying we have to purely rely on the 3 imports we brought in, but that's not the case.
You've been coaching at a high level for a very long time, and I know you talk about the Australian 3x3 thing as well, which we'll touch on briefly. But in terms of when you're playing against an opposition player, like say Jack McVeigh, and you've seen what he's done in Tasmania, seen what he's done in the NBA, is there distinct moments you remember coaching against certain guys where you're like, geez, I'd love to coach him one day? Well,
it's interesting because I think back to 2 years ago, we had 5 games that came down to the last shot, and only one of them fell in our favour. You know, there was a Perth buzzer beater we missed. There was a Tyler Harvey game winner that he hit, and obviously there was one that Lat hit for us. But there was one, right, where Jack hits it against us, and it was frustrating. That was in overtime, and, you know, we should have won the game at the end of regulation. We could sit there and pick apart all the things that happened during that game, but, you know, any one of those 5 games, that win in our favour gets us playing a play-in. You know, that was how small those margins were that year. So at the time, I was like, oh, I'm not a fan. But now that we have him, I think of that moment and go, that's where we have a big shot guy. Like, that's a moment where you can come down and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. He's just hit 2 in a row. go set a wide screen, let him hit the third one, you know. And then when the game is on the line, you know, to have someone that has the confidence that's going to step up. But also, he knows now the type of attention he's going to attract. And you start to see it a little bit, especially on the national stage, but where he can absorb the defence, draw that second defender, and then move the ball exactly where it needs to go. So that's another evolution to Jack's game. But yeah, look, you know, when he hit that dagger on us, on our home court,
in Cairns, yeah.
I wasn't a fan, but I'm definitely a fan now.
I think a lot of people are now, and we can't wait to see him in a Cairns uniform. It's just great to have him back. Touching on the imports, and it's every time we talk about imports in any team in the NBL, there is a portion of luck involved in terms of how quickly they can adapt to the NBL, to the FIBA game, to all of that. When you're looking at, I know Marcus Lee's a great example of a veteran experience, and you had the press comments talking about that, but in particular Schofield and Ashton, how do they pop up when their names come on the whiteboard? How do those conversations start, and what excites you the most about that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the Ashton one. So I was very fortunate. And again, the relationships and connections you build, you know, as a coach and the people on the way, you know, you can form some real good friendships. And one that I formed more so after his time in the NBL, because I've really connected with him, because Scott Morrison is elite in terms of cuts and shot selection. That's probably the thing that he hangs his hat on. I may be misquoting him when he says it, but you know, anyone who knows Scott as a basketball coach knows that he has this elite knowledge and background in shot selection and cutting. And so I remember I tapped into that one time, and he was real open and about, like, you know, sharing his knowledge with me. And so over the years, you know, we get a bit of banter back and forth now with some of the memes and so forth that we send, but I was pestering him forever to come out and hang out with him in Utah. And so he was coaching the Utah Summer League for the Salt Lake City Summer League. And so I got to go out there. And so, you know, when you're amongst it and you see it, you know, there's ideas that you pick up along the way. Anyway, Memphis is there. And, you know, the head coach for Memphis is coaching their Summer League team. And they've just got everybody picking up full court and hounding the ball and being really elite at it. So, you know, Philandris Fleming Jr., who played last year in Germany, and I think just signed in Italy, and that was someone we were looking at too at one stage. He was picking up full court as this 6'5" combo guard, wing type player. And then the last pick in the draft was a Mashak out of Tennessee, and he was picking up full court. I mean, he was drafted averaging 6 points a game in Tennessee, but it's for his defensive presence that he's there. And then there was another one, Ace Baldwin Jr., and he was picking up full court. And the whole list was. And naturally I was watching that game because Will Magnan was playing. And I just wanted to watch him play and get up and down. But, you know, you start drawing yourself to these types of players and you sit here and go, these guys would be really good in the NBL. So, you know, you start looking into it, researching it, and what I've come to see, whether they did it on purpose or not, but all the guys they had on the court were Naismith Defensive Player of the Year finalists from the last 2-3 years. So that's a good idea. Like, we'll start looking at the list, and you know, there's bigs. Bigs generally win the Defensive Player of the Year award, but it's funny, the other 3 or 4 nominees are always guards or wings, and they always tend to award it to the big. And so, you know, you go back 2025, and those guys are in the NBL will get drafted. In 2024, those guys are in the NBA. In 2023, and those guys are contracted G League or NBA. And I think it went back to 2020, and Ashton Hagans was on that list. And so naturally, I'm looking at him, and your first clip you look up on Synergy, you just hit random, and he's defending Steph Curry. And you're like, okay, well, if he can do that, like, he'll be okay here, I think.
Yeah.
And then the more we explored it, the more we researched it and did a Zoom with him, his whole mindset is this pass-first, defensive-minded. You know, even chatting with him, he knows. So he's 26. He wants to try and get back into the NBA. He'd done a year in China. He knows China's not going to give him to the NBA. This is going to be a great opportunity to give him one good swing at it. And even by his own words, you know, he knows it's not going to be scoring 25, 30 points. It's going to get him there. It's going to be 8 points, 10 assists, 4 steals, and winning Defensive Player of the Year. And so that's the type of dude we want to bring in that, while he's not limited offensively, he's just really, he's just really switched on with when he picks his moments. So that's going to be great to play alongside Jack and Wardenberg. And so that's how we sort of ended up going down that rabbit hole, was just sitting there watching what Memphis were doing and getting the idea from them.
It's great to see you. I wanted to have an extended chat with you before we get into it. Well, but the reason was because there's a lot to talk about, but also it's hard not to sit here and just sense from you talking to you even before we started recording. You feel re-energized with everything that's transpired, all the hard work that Troy and Mark and everybody in Cairns did behind the scenes. It's paid off, obviously, with the first tick with putting together such an exciting roster. But there's just a different energy about you going into this season because I know it would have been hard in the last few years where you have to, everything's just got to go right. And it hasn't. There's been injuries. There's been so many different things. Is it fair to say that's a different thing?
I guess it's interesting because it feels like it's been a busy off season, and there's been a lot going on. But yeah, there is a feeling of, I guess, feeling refreshed for it. Especially when you do a lot of self-reflection as well. When you lose 15 straight, it humbles you. But what I loved about it too was when we lost 15 straight and then we turned the new year, we had some big scalps, and it was with the same guys that just didn't quit. And so there's a lot of areas you take away from that and go, okay, there was things that we didn't drop the standards on or that we wanted to stay true to ourselves. And these are the changes we hope that are going to help fix, or correct some of the things that, needed to be fixed, especially with the way the league's growing. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And that's probably now the sense of, I guess, responsibility that comes with it, that we're not running away from this. We're quite comfortable sitting here saying we've put a team together that's going to win a championship. This is a team that has put, and when I say team, I'm talking about front office, Mark, Troy, everybody, the club as a whole. This is everyone that's put their name and their reputation and their own skin in it, in a sense of going, we're putting ourselves out there to say, this is going to be the best Taipans team and the most well-resourced team we've ever put out there. This is going to be our best chance of winning a championship. Anything less than that's going to be disappointing. I'm not scared of that. That's a moment where we all have to rise to the occasion. We've always gone out to compete. We've always gone out there with the mindset to win. This is not a case of in past years where you sit there and go, oh, we're happy just to coast through. The only difference right now is where our own internal standards have always been that. I think the outside looking in are going to put that extra burden on us and go, okay, well, yeah, you have, knuckled up for it. So with that comes a little bit more pressure. And we say, great, that's what we're open to embrace.
That's a great way to end this. I could keep talking to you for ages. There's a lot to talk about, Forde. Thank you so much. Good luck for the rest of the year, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Appreciate it. Sounds good.